From the first clang of metal on metal in the pre-dawn silence, a quiet reckoning was already unfolding. In a dim garage on the edge of a modest town, a young mechanic, 23-year-old Ethan, wiped grease from his palms as he stared at the somber shape of a stalled car. He had been working through the night, pushing himself beyond tired, driven by a promise that no one in need would leave his bay stranded. He carried in his heart the memory of his late mother and the responsibility of caring for his little brother. The smell of oil and engine coolant hung thick in the air. Then she arrived, an elderly woman named Mrs. Lawson, her eyes worried, her trembling hands unable to coax life from her car. She spoke of fixed income, of pensions delayed, of a worry that words could not hide. Ethan listened, every muscle in him leaning forward, and in that moment he offered help freely. He saw in her a reflection of all those he had lost and all he still hoped to protect. He set to work, replacing a failing part, repairing a leak, and pouring from his own reserve of fuel just to send her on her way. She offered her last few bills in gratitude, but he refused, saying only, "Drive safe, ma'am." She drove off, relief etched on her face, but unseen eyes watched, those of Mr. Barnes, the stern owner of the workshop. Later that afternoon, rage erupted in the shop when Mr. Barnes discovered the unpaid repair. The word charity cut the silence. Ethan's calm explanation was met with fury. Without warning, he was dismissed on the spot. As he removed his gloves and turned away, Mrs. Lawson returned just in time to see him forced out. She cried out, but Ethan walked on, intact in dignity, though his future felt suddenly uncertain. Before we move forward, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The days that followed felt endless for Ethan. What began as one quiet morning of lost work turned into a week of uncertainty. He walked from shop to shop, resume in hand, the smell of motor oil still clinging to his jacket, a scent that reminded him of who he was and what he had lost. Each door he knocked on closed politely with the same words, "Sorry, we're not hiring." Some didn't even look up from their desks. His reputation had traveled faster than he could. Word in small towns spreads easily, and once you're seen as a man who gives away work for free, trust fades where money talks louder. He returned home each night to a dimly lit room he shared with his younger brother, Nathan. The boy's laughter was the only light left in his world. Ethan smiled for him, but behind those quiet smiles was the weight of unpaid bills and a heart unsure of what to do next. The savings he had carefully set aside dwindled into coins. Sometimes he'd open his small metal toolbox, tracing the dents and scratches with his fingers, remembering how his late father had given it to him as a boy. "These tools can fix anything," his father once said. But now, staring at them under a weak flicker of light, Ethan wondered if they could fix a broken future. Nights turned into early mornings filled with silence, and he could hear his brother whisper prayers through the thin walls. It was the kind of hope Ethan didn't think he still deserved. Meanwhile, across town, Barnes' auto service was no longer the same. The hum of laughter that once echoed between the lifts had gone missing. The apprentices, young men barely out of high school, worked slower, quieter. The customers who once greeted Ethan by name now hesitated to return. The woman who ran the front desk noticed the difference first. Fewer calls, more complaints, more refunds. The business still functioned, but the soul of the place was gone. Mr. Barnes, who had always prided himself on control and order, began to notice it too. He'd stand by the office window in the mornings, coffee untouched, watching customers drive past his shop to visit the newer garage down the street. He told himself it was the economy, that people just wanted cheaper rates, but deep down he knew the truth. There had been something about Ethan's presence, something beyond his skill, that made people trust this place. Without him, the walls echoed differently. He dismissed the thought at first, muttering under his breath that kindness never paid the bills. But when one of his apprentices quit unexpectedly, leaving behind only a short note that read, "It doesn't feel right here anymore," the words hit harder than he wanted to admit. It was 3 days after that when the bell above the front door rang softly. Standing there was Mrs. Lawson. Her cane tapped gently against the tiled floor as she made her way toward Mr. Barnes's office. The old man looked up, confused, until she introduced herself. "You fired a boy named Ethan a few days ago," she said. He frowned, remembering the moment too vividly. "Yes, ma'am. He cost this shop money," he replied. She nodded slowly, her voice trembling but steady. "He also gave me something no money could ever buy." Mr. Barnes listened in silence as she told her story, the one he had never known. That day, when Ethan fixed her car, she had been on her way to the hospital to see her grandson. The child had been battling a terminal illness, and the doctors had warned her time was short. She made it to the hospital just in time to hold his hand as he took his final breath. "If that young man hadn't helped me," she said, tears forming, "I would have missed that goodbye." For a long moment the air between them was heavy with emotion. The sound of the ticking wall clock grew louder. Mr. Barnes sat back in his chair, the memory of his own son's accident years ago flashing through his mind. The sirens, the call, the way he'd built this business to bury his grief under metal and noise. But grief has a way of waiting. That night he didn't sleep. He sat alone in the dark, replaying every word Mrs. Lawson had spoken, every shout he had thrown at Ethan. The same hands that once built engines now trembled with regret. For the first time in years, the man who thought he had nothing left to feel found himself weeping quietly, realizing that sometimes it isn't the broken machines that need fixing, it's us. The morning sun crept slowly through the blinds of Mr. Carter's kitchen, lighting up the cold cup of coffee that had sat untouched since dawn. He hadn't slept a minute the night before. Every word Mrs. Thompson had spoken kept replaying in his head. How Daniel's kindness allowed her to say goodbye to her grandson before he passed. That sentence alone had cracked something inside him that years of business and pride had built up. For the first time in years, he saw his reflection in the window and barely recognized himself. He wasn't looking at a man running a successful garage. He was looking at a man who had forgotten what humanity felt like. By mid-morning, he finally gave in to the gnawing weight in his chest. He grabbed his car keys, stepped outside, and drove across town. The neighborhoods grew smaller, humbler, quieter. He pulled into a street lined with rusted mailboxes and tired front lawns, a place where hard work and survival went hand in hand. He parked in front of a modest home with fading paint and a worn porch. It was Daniel's. For a moment, Carter stayed seated, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. Pride begged him to turn around, but guilt had already taken the driver's seat. Finally, he stepped out and walked up to the door. When Daniel opened it, he froze, his face a mix of confusion and disbelief. He hadn't seen his former boss since the day he was fired. For a moment, silence filled the space between them, broken only by the creak of the porch steps. Then Mr. Carter spoke, his voice lower and slower than Daniel had ever heard. "I owe you an apology, son." Daniel blinked, unsure how to respond. Mr. Carter swallowed hard and continued. "I was wrong. You did something that I should have seen for what it was, real decency. You showed kindness when I only cared about rules and money. That woman you helped, Mrs. Thompson, she came to see me. She told me her story. You didn't just fix her car, Daniel. You gave her a chance to say goodbye to someone she loved. That kind of heart doesn't belong outside my garage. It belongs right in it." The old man's eyes glistened, his voice cracking under the weight of regret. "I can't undo what I did, but I can try to make it right. If you'll take it, I want you back, not as a mechanic, but as my assistant workshop manager. You've earned it." Daniel stood still, emotions swirling inside him. Surprise, relief, disbelief. Then slowly, a small, humble smile crossed his face. "I'd be honored, sir," he said quietly, his voice trembling with gratitude. Mr. Carter reached out his hand. Daniel shook it firmly. The handshake of two men changed by one small act of kindness. The next morning, Carter's garage came alive again. But this time, something about it felt different. The clang of tools and hum of engines were still there, but the mood had shifted. The energy was warmer. As Daniel walked through the open bay doors, the other mechanics stopped what they were doing. Then, one by one, they began clapping. Apprentices he'd trained, Mark, Luis, Terry, gathered around, smiling from ear to ear. "Welcome back, man," one of them shouted. Even customers waiting for service joined in the quiet applause. Near the office door stood Mrs. Thompson, leaning gently on her cane. Her smile radiated pride and gratitude. "I told you good things come back around," she said softly. Daniel smiled, his eyes glistening. Mr. Carter walked up beside him. His once stern expression softened into something almost fatherly. He placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder and said, "This place runs on engines, but it lives on people like you." The room went quiet for a moment, the words sinking in. Then laughter broke out, and the garage returned to life, the rhythm of teamwork, respect, and hope filling every corner. Days turned into weeks, and Daniel's presence reshaped the garage. He trained the apprentices not just to fix cars, but to treat every customer like family. He greeted people by name, stayed late to help those in need, and refused to let anyone leave feeling hopeless. The once cold garage now buzzed with energy, compassion, and pride. And Mr. Carter, the man who once ruled with anger, found himself learning again. Watching Daniel reminded him that leadership wasn't about control. It was about heart. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness can rebuild more than just trust. It can heal hearts, revive dreams, and remind us that goodness still lives among us, even when the world seems to have forgotten it. The scene fades into a slow montage. Daniel teaching a young apprentice how to tune an engine, Mrs. Thompson stopping by with homemade pie, Mr. Carter laughing for the first time in years. The air feels lighter. Maybe kindness doesn't fix everything, but in moments like these it fixes enough to matter. What would you have done if you were in Daniel's shoes? Would you have helped the old woman, even if it meant risking your job? If this story touched your heart, let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Stories by BB for more powerful true stories that remind us kindness costs nothing, but it truly changes everything.